Joseph Dugashvili was born the son of a cobbler and an alcoholic in a small town in the Russian Empire. By the time he died in 1953, he was the absolute ruler of the Soviet Union. Between those 2 points, he drove an agrarian society to become a nuclear-armed superpower and directly caused the deaths of somewhere between 6 and 20 million of his own citizens. His mother had pushed him toward a religious education, but by his early 20s, he abandoned his theological seminary to join the Marxist underground. He adopted the Russian word for steel to create his new name, Stalin. Most of the revolutionary figures around him were intellectuals who spent their time debating Marxist theory. Stalin took a different path. He was a ruthless organizer who funded Vladimir Lenin's Bolshevik party by leading armed strikes and robbing banks. He lacked the philosophical polish of his peers, but he possessed something far more effective. He knew how to acquire power, and he was completely willing to weaponize violence to achieve his political goals. In 1922, the Communist Party appointed Stalin to the role of General Secretary. At the time, his peers largely dismissed the job as tedious administrative work, managing paperwork, correspondence, and low-level personnel files. This shifting organizational chart shows exactly how Stalin exploited that underestimation. As General Secretary, he controlled party appointments. Over the next several years, he used this authority to systematically fire thousands of local officials, replacing them with his own loyal supporters across the entire Soviet system. Because these local officials owed their careers entirely to Stalin, they formed an impenetrable bureaucratic wall. He had successfully insulated his own power base from the rest of the party leadership. Lenin realized what was happening shortly before his death in 1924. He drafted a final testament, explicitly warning the party to remove Stalin from his post. But Stalin's network was already too strong. The document was suppressed, and Stalin stayed. The early Soviet state assumed authority belonged to the visionaries who wrote the revolutionary theory. Stalin proved that true, inescapable power resides with the administrator who controls the hiring. With Lenin gone, Stalin faced a series of high-profile rivals, including Leon Trotsky, Grigory Zinoviev, and Nikolai Bukharin. Stalin played them against each other with the skill of a grandmaster. He formed alliances to isolate one target, destroyed them, and then discarded his former allies when their usefulness expired. By 1929, he had defeated them all, and collectivization became the first massive crime of his undisputed rule. The Soviet government ordered the violent combination of millions of privately owned peasant farms into collective, state-run agricultural operations. Farmers who resisted were labeled kulaks, a term for relatively affluent peasants, and targeted for elimination. Official Soviet records document nearly 400,000 deaths, as entire rural populations were either shot or deported to forced labor camps. The immediate result of violently stripping experienced farmers from the land was a massive disruption in food production. This engineered agricultural failure caused the devastating Soviet famine of 1932 to 1933, a catastrophe that killed between 3.5 and 5 million Ukrainians. This starvation was a deliberate weapon. By breaking the backs of the independent farmers, Stalin forced the entire rural population into absolute dependence on the state for their daily survival. Having crushed the countryside, Stalin turned his attention inward. Between 1936 and 1938, he orchestrated the Great Terror, a period of systematic destruction aimed at anyone who might plausibly become a political threat. Nearly 800,000 executions were carried out. This purge decimated the Red Army. Stalin eliminated approximately 35,000 experienced military officers, including 3 of his 5 top marshals, gutting his own armed forces on the eve of a global conflict. In 1939, Stalin signed a non-aggression pact with Hitler to divide Eastern Europe. Despite multiple intelligence warnings, he was genuinely shocked when Germany broke the agreement and invaded the Soviet Union in June 1941. The initial months were a slaughter, with over 3 million Soviet soldiers captured by the end of the year. The momentum only broke at the Battle of Stalingrad, where Soviet forces managed to encircle and destroy Germany's Sixth Army. From the rubble of that city, the Soviet war machine pushed relentlessly forward until they reached the streets of Berlin. Looking at this chart, the sheer scale of the victory becomes horrifying. The Soviet Union suffered approximately 27 million military and civilian deaths, the largest toll of any nation in the war, dwarfing the losses of all other major Allied powers combined. Beating back the German invasion at such a monumental cost validated Stalin's extreme methods in his own mind. He emerged from the rubble of World War II as an untouchable global leader. By the post-war era, Stalin was indisputably one of the three most powerful men on Earth, a position cemented in 1949 when the Soviet Union successfully tested its first atomic bomb. But as his control expanded outward, his psyche collapsed inward. His final years were defined by extreme paranoia. He fabricated the doctor's plot, accusing Kremlin physicians of attempting to assassinate Soviet leaders, laying the groundwork for an entirely new wave of mass arrests. He died before the new purge could be launched, suffering a fatal stroke on March 5, 1953. His inner circle had grown so terrified of his temper that they waited several hours before daring to summon medical help. His death created an immediate, desperate power vacuum among the high-ranking officials who walked behind his casket. The undisputed dictator was gone, leaving a heavily armed, nuclear-capable state with no clear successor. A government built entirely around the terror induced by a single man becomes utterly paralyzed the moment that man falls silent. It took 3 years for the Soviet system to openly address the trauma. In 1956, the new leader, Nikita Khrushchev, delivered his secret speech to the party Congress, shocking the political elite by meticulously cataloging Stalin's crimes. This triggered a nationwide process of de-Stalinization. The government erased his name from major cities, systematically dismantled his cult of personality, and released millions of prisoners from the forced labor camps. He started his life in poverty in a provincial Caucasian town. He died as the architect of a global superpower, having killed more human beings than almost any other individual in recorded history. Next time, we are stepping back from the 20th century to examine 200 years of religious warfare. We will track the long, brutal conflict between Christian Europe and the Islamic world. We'll explore the underlying economic and political forces that actually drove the Crusades, the immense cost in human lives, and why those distant centuries of violence still influence how the West and the Middle East understand each other today.